We are wrapping up the information on our section 4 of our typed outline for the Renaissance with the topic of mannerism. So you can see here, wanted to show you where we are on the typed outline so you can make sure that you're getting this information down as you are watching the recorded PowerPoint. Mannerism is the new artistic movement that emerged in the Italian states in the 1520s and 1530s after the Renaissance. So you can see we're going to go through some of the characteristics of mannerism. It was considered a reaction against the Renaissance ideals of balance, symmetry, and realistic use of color. If you remember, the High Renaissance had taken art to the perfection. There was very little that could be done to improve it. You think about what Michelangelo did, and Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci in all of their famous works. Now imagine being an artist that's coming, after them, and there's really no way to perfect what has already been done. So these mannerists are rebelling against the Renaissance ideas. Their works on little b often used unnatural colors, while shapes were elongated or otherwise exaggerated. Now there's a big difference between Mannerist art characteristics versus the Renaissance. So I'm going to show you obviously some of the works of Mannerism and one particular artist that is very famous with this art movement. So perhaps the greatest of the Mannerist artists is El Greco. He is a Greek artist who did his most important work in Spain. And as a Mannerist artist, he used, again, that characteristic we just went over, the elongated figures and unnatural acidic colors. You're going to see examples of his work in just a moment. You can go ahead and put the titles of two of his most important works, Burial of Count Orgaz and Toledo. So these are two different examples of the work of El Greco, a well-known Mannerist artist. Here is one of El Greco's work. This is the one titled Burial of Count Orgaz. You can see the colors are very different from the Renaissance. His other work, Toledo, again, you can see the coloration very different. And then the characteristic of the elongated, exaggerated figures is very evident in this next work that you don't have to write down, which is the opening of the fifth seal of the Apocalypse. So you can see here, these figures are way larger than realistic. So you can see their figures are being exaggerated, their limbs are elongated. So these again are clear characteristics of a Mannerist painting. So we are finally finished with section 4 on the Italian art, and we are moving into Roman numeral 5, which is going to focus on the Northern Renaissance. So this is a good time to stop for a minute and tell you that your next quiz coming up at the end of the week is going to cover information Roman numeral 2, part B, where it says the major city-states of Italy. You'll start your studying there, and you'll continue all the way through all of sections 3 and 4. Okay, so what we're about to start on section 5 will not be on the quiz this week. So make sure between now and then you are studying that information, and I'll post an announcement with the specific, again, sections just as a reminder. So we're going to begin section 5 right now. Make sure you've either got this printed out or you've already jotted it down so you can fill it in as we go through this recorded PowerPoint. So in this space right here, we're going to go ahead and give a quick description of where the Northern Renaissance took place. So I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint so you can write down that information in that space. So put down, because it's not here, and just listen and I'll repeat it. The Renaissance spreads to France, England, Holland, the German states, and Spain. Let me repeat that again. The Renaissance spread to France, England, Holland, the German states, and Spain. Also go ahead and put down that it was centered in the king's courts. It was centered in the king's courts. What that tells us is that a lot of the kings were patrons of this Renaissance art in the northern parts of Europe, whereas in the Italian Renaissance, we saw it from wealthy families as well as from the church. So you have a difference with patronage depending on the location of this Renaissance movement. So when we look at Christian humanism, there is an emphasis on early church writings that provided answers on how to improve society and reform the church. One more time. There's this emphasis or focus on early church writings that provided answers on how to improve society and reform the church. We see that there is less emphasis on pagan works from ancient Greece and Rome. So what you're going to see with these Christian humanist writers that we're going to be talking about shortly is their writings are definitely focused on how to improve society as well as reform or make changes to the church. So that's a big difference from when we talked about the Italian Renaissance and the humanists that were conducting their work. So now the focus for the Northern Renaissance is more on reforming the church and improving society in works of literature. You're going to also see with Christian humanism an emphasis with education and power of human intellect to bring about institutional change and moral improvement. So again, just kind of going over some of the characteristics that you're going to see with Christian humanism. Now, major characteristic is here at the bottom. These Christian humanists rejected medieval scholasticism. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. In favor of Roman authors, Greek writings like Plato, and early Christian writers. So what is meant by medieval scholasticism is that the clergy would teach you from the church point of view. You know, everybody was focused on church teachings and what they wanted you to understand and know. And now these Christian humanists are rejecting that, more so in favor of the Roman authors, the Greek writers, as well as early Christian writers. Another characteristic of Christian humanism is that their writings led to criticism of the church, thus leading to the Reformation. So this sheds some light on one of the most important characteristics of Northern humanism, which is to reform the church, which unfortunately for the church, there's going to be a lot of criticism, and that does bring about this major movement in world history referred to as the Reformation. So more about that coming up very, very soon. So we're going to take a look at some examples of these Christian humanists. And one of the most famous of all Northern humanists is Erasmus. So we know Erasmus was a master of the Greek language. He was the first humanist to earn a living by writing, which for the time period we're studying is an extremely impressive achievement, that he actually earned a living thanks to his writing. He was also a devout Catholic who sought to reform the church, not to destroy it. So again, he's trying to give some constructive criticism about some of the issues that he sees going on with the Catholic Church, but he has absolutely no intention of trying to bring the church down or destroy it. You should now be on number 5 of your typed outline. So just ignore this number. This is not correct on the actual slide itself, but on your typed outline, it does say number 5, which this is one of Erasmus, or it is his best seller. It's called In Praise of Folly. To tell you how popular it was, only the Bible sold more copies by the year 1550. It was written in Latin, and so that means it wasn't really intended for mass consumption, because keep in mind, not everybody could read and interpret Latin. What he did in this famous bestseller, In Praise of Folly, was he satirized people's worldly ambitions, including the clergy. So again, this is what he is doing in this book. He criticized the immorality and hypocrisy of church leaders and the clergy. And when I use the word clergy, I'm talking about paid leaders of the church, like monks, priests, for example. The hypocrisy that he focused on was that some of these clergymen were drinking excessively. They were having relations with women. They would preach one thing and do the complete opposite. So that's the hypocrisy we're talking about here. Now, if you don't know much about the Roman Catholic Church, understand that these paid leaders, like a monk or a priest, they took vows to basically uphold and live a life according to God and the teachings of the church. So they weren't supposed to go out and party and drink and have relations with women and get married, because they were basically married to God in the church. So these are some things that, as a Catholic, Erasmus was witnessing and wanted to kind of satirize this in his book. And it's because if he were to be openly critic of the church, he could end up being labeled a heretic. And we all know that the punishment for heresy is being burned to death at the stake. So he was very careful to make sure that he would not end up being killed for his criticism of the church. He did it using satire, which was very creative. So remember, when a writer uses satire, they are poking fun at a particular subject matter. And so in this case, he was poking fun at the clergy, implying that they were not really religious. We know that Erasmus, this famous work, In Praise of Folly, inspired renewed calls for reform within the church, and the book will greatly influence Martin Luther, who is a main figure for the Reformation when we get to that. Famous quote by some contemporaries, those who lived at the time, they claimed that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched, which of course is in regards to the Reformation. So Erasmus is basically setting the foundation for Luther to come along and start this great reformation of the Catholic Church. So for now, we're done with Erasmus information, and I'm going to go ahead and end this video so we can continue the information about the Northern humanists in the next video.